Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I just got a Skype message saying my computer's causing some bad audio, so if you're having trouble hearing me, hopefully that will resolve itself. If it's intermittent and you can hear me now, please type into the chat box and let me know. So this webinar is being recorded so that people can watch it later. And I'm going to leave this slide up for a little while just because some people might be coming in a little late, so I figure I'll leave this up while I introduce myself. My name's Kim Cressman. I'm the System-Wide Monitoring Program Coordinator at Grand Bay Reserve in Mississippi. I've been working here since about 2011 on the water quality, weather, nutrient aspects of swamp. And about 5 years ago, when Marcus Beck and Todd O'Brien did an R training at the annual meeting, I went to it, and I had kind of started working in R at that point, and then I dove in deeper. So I've been working in R for several years now. I've been involved with Swamp Rats and the Swamper R package and some trainings, as well as being on one of the working groups for the swamp status reports that just got developed. So I have a lot of background in that stuff and also in data. So once I got into R, I started playing with every data set that I could get my hands on. And I started working with our reserve's surface elevation table data. So that's kind of how this came about, is that last year at the annual meeting, some folks shared some of the graphs that I had made in R, and other people got excited and said, we want to do that too. You should put in a grant, and this project kind of came together. So this is the kickoff webinar for us. It's a year-long project that will run through next August, and today we'll just tell you a little bit about it and how you can be involved. The project team is from all over the country and all of the different sectors. This started off as wanting some technical graphs, some data visualizations to help with QA/QC and some of the technical aspects of things. But then in another conversation at the annual meeting last year, somebody mentioned it sure would be nice if we could use some of our own reserves set data in our teachers on the estuary workshops, the tote workshops. So the light bulb went on and we said, let's tie this all together. If we are developing tools to help people work with and understand their set data from the technical standpoint, let's pull in some of these outreach professionals from the Coastal Training Program and from education and let them help us craft some products for their audiences. We're most of the way there once we understand the data ourselves. So let's pull people in and get the rest of the way and get out to everyone. Sean says they're having trouble viewing. I'm sharing a PowerPoint presentation. Someone in the room with me logged in can see it. So it should be working, Sean, and I'm not sure what to tell you. And a couple people say audio isn't working. All right, and others of you have audio and visual. So let me try. If it's server issues, then sharing my screen might not help you guys, Justin, and I'm really sorry. You might have to just watch it on YouTube. Yeah, I'm really sorry, guys. Some of you have no visual, and I don't think switching anything on my end will help because most of you it's working. So this will be recorded and on YouTube. If you guys have the bandwidth now, I actually set this up so that you can download the PowerPoint. So you can try that. If you go to the little button that looks like a share screen button, and then click on Manage Content, you should be able to save this, and then maybe you can follow along. And otherwise, maybe catch it on YouTube later. So by now, you guys have seen the names on the list, and the two big things at the bottom, the technical team and the outreach team, we want to bring people together and sort of focus on all these different aspects. So I'm going to be referring to technical team a lot and outreach team a lot, where technical team generally means our stewardship and research sectors, and outreach is going to be education and coastal training program. This is just a graphic that Suzanne put together. Suzanne is one of our collaborative leads. And this shows people measuring surface elevation at the various reserves involved. So while you guys are looking at these awesome pictures, someone asked how to download the PowerPoint. Go to the little button that looks like a share screen button. And if you don't see that, look for the little ... options. And then select Manage Content, and you should be able to save it. And I'm typing that in so you don't have to remember it. Okay. Hopefully that'll work. For this webinar, we just wanted to give you all a quick overview of the project. Let you see some of the tools that we're talking about developing and see how you can provide input to make these things happen. Let me go back one slide, actually. I did want to point out some reserves are measuring not just marshes, but SAV beds or even mangroves. And so when I say marsh, I'm not trying to exclude the rest of you. It's just we couldn't come up with a good, concise phrase that included everything. So to be concise, we just said marsh elevation, but really any elevation you want to measure, that's what we're talking about. Our overall goal of the project is really just to make it easier for reserves to work with set data. At Grand Bay, we've been collecting this data since 2011, 2012, and I know several reserves have been for several years. The last I checked, 26 reserves were gathering surface elevation table data. So what we aim to do with this project is help out with some of the data formatting, because as far as I can tell, we're all storing it ever so slightly differently. We want to help contribute to QA/QC, looking at your data, doing those quality checks to make sure nothing is weird, or if something weird happened, you catch it. We want to provide some tools for the data analysis, and we also want to help all of us communicate about the data. Our primary goal, our primary audiences for the project are reserve staff. But we do think with all the efforts that are happening with the Park Service, the Fish and Wildlife Service, USGS, NERRS Sentinel Site cooperatives, we want to be tied into these other efforts and hope that these tools can be useful to other people too. One of the beautiful things about R, which is the computer program I'm talking about, is it's open source and it's easy to share what you're doing. So we think that we can help out on many fronts. I actually had a poll that I wanted to share before I showed this slide to ask all of you about your background. Let's see if this will show up. All right, you should be able to go ahead and vote and tell me, are you field staff? Are you data management staff? Do you care about analysis, education, or do you have no idea what a set is? And I'll just leave this open for a second. All right, lots of different aspects of things. So most of you are involved, it looks like, in many different facets of these. Hey, and nobody answered what's a set. That's awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and close this and go back to the presentation. It's thinking. It'll be back in just a minute. Given everybody's involvement with sets so far, the next couple slides I can probably not spend too much time on. The first one that's loading, is what is a set? And it's a diagram that came out of the document by Jim Lynch, Philippe Hensel, and Donald Cahoon from the National Park Service set protocols. They have a lot of great diagrams, a lot of great information. This came out in 2015, so it's a little more recent than some of our set installations, but it's really great. So this is a nice diagram of a surface elevation table. And the main idea is that we have these 9 pins that are on an arm that we set in the same spot every time we're out in the marsh. And every so often you take measurements of where those pins are when they hit the ground, and you can see if the surface is changing over time. There are great protocols for taking all these measurements, and a fair amount of confusion about what to do once we have the data. And so we're hoping to address some of that. Now these fit into the Sentinel sites generally because if you have vertical control, if you have some benchmarks, or if you've taken leveled some of your stations to NAVD 88, or if you can relate your station to a tidal datum, then you can see where is our marsh surface, not just how is it changing over time, but where is it relative to the water level. And that's what we're really concerned about with sea level rise. So in the proposal, the terminology for why was outcomes. Why do we want to do this project? And it's some of the things I've already mentioned. Help with QA/QC, integrate across all of the sectors and the reserves so that we can make sure we're all communicating information, communicating with each other, and communicating with the various audiences that we engage with. We want reserves to be able to use the Sentinel site data to inform audiences and improve decision making, increase the analysis capacity of the reserve system, and help national organizations like NOAA better understand some of these national trends. One of our selling points for this proposal was doing a national synthesis at the end, and I'll get into that a little bit later. But the idea is to help show that sort of national level, big picture of what's happening. And the proposal language for the what are we going to do was outputs. I'm going to spend most of the rest of the time here talking about the technical tools and outreach tools. So some different graphs we can make, reformatting data, getting some statistical advice, and some of the ways we can put that into practice with education and coastal training programs. There's also going to be a workshop at the end of this project next year and a webinar both focused on technical aspects of all of this. We're also going to do a virtual outreach meeting to go over these outreach visualizations. Along the way, we'll be providing local analyses, so reserve level workups of the data and visualizations, and then a national synthesis report based on reserves that have shared data. We have 7 on board so far. So this is one of the example graphs. And I've really only done graphs so far with our data here. I haven't done tables, but a lot of people like those. So we can generate some of those too. And that's where end user input's really going to come in. One of the things we noticed when we started looking at graphs is sometimes something can get mixed up. And if you look at it on a graph, you can see. So just circled it, and you can see Hey, something's weird in the data. Look back at the notes and say, oh, there was a new staff person that was out in the field that day. It got mixed up, fix it, and move on. I've had people ask about getting graphs like this, not just at the set level, but for each arm position or even for each pin. I've made a few of those along the way. At the pin level, it gets a little crazy because there are 36 per set, so that'll be something for discussion with the technical team for sure. So this is the only one I'll really show. It is possible to make some interactive graphs too, to where you could hover over these points and see what the date was, what that weird data point is that you need to go back and look at. There are different ways to do that. And so we'll discuss that with the technical group. So the big question, though, is going to be, what do you need? What do you, the end users, need? This project is funded by the Science Collaborative, which is probably something I should have said up front. And they really like to see end users driving whatever comes out of projects. They don't just want us making something that nobody's going to use. And those of us on the project team don't want to do that either. We want to make things that are useful to you. So this is going to come up for discussion over the course of the project. Another thing we're going to tackle, at least for reserves that share data for this project, is reformatting that data into a standardized format. There is a system-wide group working on data templates. And if they make a decision while we're still working on this, we are happy to put the data in that format. If they're still thinking about it, we're going to go with what works for the project and then give them feedback. I'm not trying to make any decisions on behalf of the system here, but I've looked at only 5 data sets so far, but every single one has been different. So we can save some time down the road if we get it into some kind of standard format. Even if the decision by the set working group is a little bit different, it'll be easier to take everybody's data set that's in this format and switch it to the preferred one than to start from scratch at every reserve. So I'll show a couple examples. Here's one reserve that is keeping different surface elevation tables in different tabs of an Excel worksheet, and they're adding columns with every sampling date. Other reserves have more of what's called a long format, where there's one row for every pin reading. And this particular reserve has different years in different spreadsheets. Some reserves combine it, so they do a format like this that's a little bit one row per pin, but all of the years are on the same spreadsheet. So there are similarities, but there are differences too. And one of the things that we're going to have to do for this project to get the outputs and reports that we're promising is put all of that into the same format. So one paper that I'm going to link to at the end of this is from Hadley Wickham, and it's called Tidy Data. This is a big thing in our world especially. The idea is you have one observation per row, one variable per column, and one type of data per table. So you're not getting a big messy data set, and you can kind of control what you're looking at. The template that the set working group was favoring last time I participated in a call was similar to what I just shared on your screen, this long format with one row per pin reading. There's another kind of format that you can use too that's called a wide format, and I don't know how well those numbers are showing up on your screen, but if you look down the row from the first one I showed where it's 122, 116, 103.5, those are going across the first row. And so what I did in the second one was there's one row per arm, and you have your 9 pin measurements per arm in that row. So there's some discussion and arguing about which is better, just generally, not just with set data. But the key thing is it's really, really easy to switch between these data formats. Once you have your data in one of these formats, it's super easy to transform it into a different one. It's only about 2 lines of code in R. So we're going to get it into something like this based on advice of the technical team, and see what we can do with that. So this is related to the set working group efforts and the template development. And the idea behind that working group, from my understanding, is get everybody's data in the same format so that it can be uploaded to the Centralized Data Management Office. For those of you who are non-reserve staff, that's what CDMO stands for. They have a fantastic database for water quality, nutrient, and weather data. We are not there yet for sets. It would take a lot more resources than they have. And so what we're looking at right now is just submitting CSV files that people can download. This is the most recent template that I saw from the set working group, which is similar to some of the other things I've showed you, with one row per pin. Also some columns for problem codes, which is really useful. Something really good that's also coming out of that set working group is metadata that is also in an Excel format. And something like this can be really useful because, you know, one of the columns they have here is dominant vegetation for the site. I think another column is NAVD 88 elevation. So you can store all of that in sort of its own table. If you have something that's not changing with the data, then you don't need to associate it with your main data table. You have it somewhere else and link it in later. And they're doing that really well in this set working group. And this is just sort of the README file for that metadata, a little explanation of some of the other things that they're thinking about including. I've had a lot of questions in the last week about the database that's being developed for the Fish and Wildlife Service and DOI generally. That database is fabulous, but that's not what we're doing, and we are not creating a database for this particular project. So at the end of this project, all of the outputs will be archived on the CDMO's website, but they're never going to change after that. So there will be some data files there. We said that we'd share the data, but those are not going to be updated. So this is not replacing any of the other efforts that are happening. We do hope that it will help because, like I said, we'll be wrangling this data into some kind of standardized format that'll be a little bit easier to deal with when decisions are made at the system-wide level. So another output of this is going to be some statistical recommendations. Philippe Hensel has done a lot of work with some of the analyses that you can do once you've been collecting this data. How do you look at trends over time? What kind of things can you look for? And it's a great start. He does say a lot in this document that if you have more complicated questions, you should consult a statistician. So in the proposal, we wrote in funding, and we do have a statistician on board. The contract has not been signed yet, so I don't want to name the person, but they have a lot of experience with environmental data and with spatial data. We actually have a GIS person on the project team that has a lot of GIS questions. So we'll be able to start asking some different questions of the data and kind of where can we go with this? And when we run into complications, like some of the recommendations from early on are to do linear regressions to get a rate of change, but what do you do if your data doesn't look linear? So we can start picking our statistician's brain on this and have some recommendations in our final report. Another output is reserve level analyses. This is still kind of a rough document, but it's what I've been sending my boss. With our data. It's just an HTML file, and there are different tabs that you can click around on. So what I did in one of the tabs is I just have all of the tables with all of the calculated rates, and at the bottom I started by pin, what's the rate of each pin over time, and then you can average the pins within the individual set and get those averages and confidence intervals. Another tab in the document would be statistical output. Another tab would be the graphics. So that's one way to kind of look at what's happening. And based on feedback from our user groups, we'll see if that's what we stick with. But that's an example. So now I'll switch to outreach tools. Here at the Gulf Reserves, they have been making an effort to use Sentinel Site data in the tote workshops, Teachers on the Estuary. And this came up at the annual meeting. And that's where the comment that I mentioned earlier happened, where someone said it would be nice to use our data. And I said, well, we've been talking about putting in a proposal to do stuff with data, so let's try to work you guys in. I will start with a disclaimer that what I'm about to show you is still pretty technical. That's why we have and why we need an outreach team. It's to help us clean these up so that people can understand them and they can be used in various situations. Not just tote workshops like I've been talking about, but with resource managers and decision makers that might be interested in how marshes are responding to sea level rise. This is one that we like a lot here. The dashed gray line is our local sea level rise of 3.5 millimeters per year. If that started at 0 at the same time we started measuring our sets, what does that slope of 3.5 millimeters per year look like? And then we have the data from the various sites in different panels of the graph and a linear regression of the rate just to kind of show what's happening and compare it. Our data has evolved a lot since then, so don't take this as the gospel truth of what's happening at our surface elevation tables, but it is one way to look at the data. Another way that people seem to really like is this graph where we actually incorporate NAVD 88 elevation. And then you can see this very top line is a site that we have that's way up in the cladium. And then our other ones are down below mean high water, close to mean sea level, generally above mean low water. What people like about this is that I have lines on here, again, with that 3.5 millimeter per year sea level rise, and then you can see kind of where things fall out relative to each other on the elevation gradient. People like that one, but it really does need a lot of explanation and cleaning up before we start sharing it with non-technical audiences. Another thing we could do with this is actually break it out by site and just kind of zoom in a little bit on the different sites and what they look like. So how are we going to pull all of this off? The first half of the year is largely going to be technical aspects, developing the R scripts, sending the products to the people who care about them and saying, what do you think? What needs to change? We have 7 reserves that are interested in being involved really intensely in this technical part of it. And this is also the time of year where we'll really be consulting with the statistician a lot with these statistical questions. What's appropriate to do? What questions does everybody have? In January, we're going to bring some of the technical project team members here to Grand Bay, and I'm going to let them loose with the R scripts I've developed and see how they work for people who haven't been staring at them for months. If there are problems, well, let me revise that. There will be problems, so let's figure out what they are with all of us in the room, figure out how to deal with those. And once we have a general idea of what that's going to look like, we'll send that out to the sector email lists and see if any other reserves want to submit their data to help out in this process to get it reformatted and get these analyses done. In the second half of the year, we're going to shift more to actually running the scripts, getting the outputs, and starting to compile the reports. And that's when the outreach team, we think, is going to get a lot more involved to figure out how to adapt these visualizations and talk about strategies for getting this information out to our audiences. So how do you provide input and participate in this process? You can sign up for our email lists. You should be able to click on that link right now if you want to. And we actually have it falling out into several different options for you. You can choose from the technical standpoint if you want to be involved in the decisions that happen or if you only want to see the final products when they're provided. And same with outreach. Do you want to be involved or do you only want to see final products? There's also a neither option for each of these. For example, if you're on the outreach team and you don't care at all about our technical stuff, you could select neither for that, and then whichever you want for outreach. We intend to have monthly calls the first Wednesday of each month at 1 o'clock Eastern, and we'll be sending out an agenda by Monday of that week so that you all can decide whether it's worth your time to be on that call. We know people are busy, so we want to let you know if the focus of this call is going to be more technical or more outreach. And we also want to give you a chance to see the things that we're going to be discussing before we actually have that call. Those emails will be coming from Suzanne Scholl, by the way. She's one of our collaborative leads on this project. And if you choose the Involve Me email lists, you'll be getting emails about these monthly calls with the draft products, and we'll have some links to some kind of discussion forum. We've been testing a few different things like Slack, where you can just kind of chat about a product, and we haven't really settled on how to discuss things beyond just email, but we're working on that. And if you participate, you can be providing input so that these tools and trainings meet your needs. Even if you're not in the reserve system, we really want to know what you think and what you need, because if it's not too much more effort to make something adaptable by other agencies, we really want to do that. You don't have to share any data to be providing input on these teams. If you do share your data, then I'm going to clean it up for you. Well, I'll tidy it. I won't be doing any QC, but I'll get it into that format for you. You'll get these reserve level analyses that we decide on, and your reserves data will be included in the national synthesis at the end of the project. So this is a grab from our timeline from the proposal when we think some of these things are going to happen. We think we should be done with the local analyses around June, and then we'll be compiling them into a national synthesis in July and August. Really the big things here are the final workshop in July. That's going to be at the Chesapeake Bay, Virginia Reserve. We were thinking that's a good central location on the East Coast and also close to the Chesapeake Bay Sentinel Site Cooperative, so we might be able to draw some people in. One of those days will be just training on all of these tools, and another day is going to be more broadly focused on statistics and what we're doing here analytically. We'll also have webinars towards the end of the project, so July or August. Some of it will be, one of them will be a technical webinar, and at least one of them will be for the outreach tools. And we expect to kind of have the final outreach products by July or August. Put final in quotes, because really a year is pretty short, and this is kind of just the beginning. And we really want these things to continue to be used and evolve. So we talked about the trainings. At the end of the project, everything will be archived on the Centralized Data Management Office website. They have a page just for science collaborative projects. I've already mentioned this, but it will be static. That's just going to be a file of all the outputs. During the project, I use GitHub for our code. Well, I won't get into it, but it's a great way to share code with other people. If you ever want to see what we're doing in R, you can do that through this link. We also have a GitHub page where we'll just be providing links to all of the various documents, and that's this other link. After the project period, we still want these things to live on. We expect to still be getting feedback from people as they're using these, and as time allows, we would like to make improvements on these. We don't want the year to be the end of it. So that stuff will still go up on GitHub. The CDMO batch of things, I think, is just going to be the end of the project, but continuing things will be up on GitHub there. All right, so these are some links you all might find useful. My email address and Suzanne's, the link for the email list, the link to that GitHub page with our various links on it, And then a couple of papers that are useful for data management. I talked about this tidy data one, but data organization and spreadsheets is a good one too if you're ever thinking about wrangling data. So I'm just going to leave this slide up so you guys can look at it while we do question and answer. And if you guys don't mind, just if you have questions, just type them in the chat box. We've got some time to address them. Someone asked earlier, is this related to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife efforts? They're also creating a database for sets. I think that question was asked before the slide where I talked about it. So sort of. We're not creating a database, but we are definitely talking with them, and we're going to stay in contact because we all have similar goals. Will the outreach products be tested by users? We hope so. Will that happen during the project period? Not really sure. We're going to try to release those probably in July so that there's a little time. But that's probably also not going to allow for really thorough testing and use. So that goes back to, we don't want this stuff to just stop. We want it to be useful and continue to grow. Any other questions? Nobody's typing. Well, if you guys want to try one more time to download the PowerPoint, here we go. Will the outreach products include some interpretation? Yes, they're going to have to. We don't think we can just throw these graphs out there without providing some kind of meaning. So yes. All right, well, I'm going to leave this slide up for just a couple minutes because I think some of you are writing down links. Again, you can try to download the PowerPoint. It looked like some people were having issues. And this webinar will also be archived on YouTube in case you want to see it again. Another question, are there other ECs besides Kristen that are involved? She is the main point person that's been on the proposal, and she's going to pull in other ECs as she sees the need for feedback on outreach. I think she did have some interest from others before this webinar. I don't have names, but the goal is to involve people that want to be involved, and she's been very good about reaching out to people. Well, thanks everybody. I'll hang out for another couple of minutes in case there are other questions, but feel free to sign off. Thanks for being here today, and let us know if you have any questions or thoughts. And don't forget to sign up for our email list.